This is the Slots and Sockets Podcast, episode number 55. I am one of your hosts, IRD Moose, and my partner in crime. Happy Monday, Turbo. Again, we're finally recording on time for a change after an unexpected hiatus. So
yes, we are back, and we'll be back to normal moving forward, which is good.
Good Lord willing, and the creek don't rise, as they say. Yep, and
absolutely.
The break that we got kind of delivered us a little bit of good news from both AMD and Nvidia. What do you want to start with?
I think most people want to talk about Nvidia because, in all honesty, I think that there's been a shift in what consumers are purchasing, and I think that's probably a thing we want to talk about first.
I think so. So let's get into it.
We've talked a lot about like our challenges with buying video cards with most people. We're not amazing enough to call people and have people just ship us stuff, but the thing is that in general, consumers are having a really hard time finding graphics cards. It's because I really think it's more demand than anything else, but I also believe that some of this is, realistically speaking, the major player Nvidia just either not supplying or not being able to supply. I think it's a business decision, to be honest. I think they're allocating more towards AI than they are to gamers, but because they're doing that, they're not making cards. And if you're not making cards, you're not selling cards. If you're not selling cards, then the problem is that your competitors need to fill in. And I think AMD has filled in, but it's hard to ramp up and provide the pure numbers that you really need to fill that gap.
Yep.
But we've got a couple of good things that are coming through the pipeline that look really promising, and it'll be very interesting to see from we know where the 9070 and the 9070 XT lie in respects to the 5000 and 4000 series. And I think the loaded question on all of these is, where does the performance lie and the price, kind of shake out? Let's be honest, the 9070 and the 9070 XT were the only cards originally firmed up from a lot of leaks. And there were leaks for a 9060 variant, but I think the notion, and from what a lot of people were saying, is that they wanted to test the waters with the 90 series, with the 70 series, before they really jumped in and committed that they were actually going to do the 6000 series.
Right.
The 70 series was so well that it was like it was no brainer. So we know that with the 9060 is a thing. It's coming out here probably, if it's not this week, it's coming out wildly soon.
Yeah.
Within the next, I would say 2 weeks for sure, for an announcement, and then cards probably by the end of the month, I would think, maybe early May. But then there's also rumblings, and very consistent rumblings, that there's going to be a 9050. I think what they're I think what we're seeing here is AMD's realizing that there really is going to be this gap in the marketplace, and anything that they make, as long as it performs well and is priced well, that they can slot a lot of these graphics cards in and just start churning out a lot of cards. And really, to be honest, it sounds like it's going to a market share push more than anything else. From AMD's side, they've done really well. Their drivers are spot on. The features that everyone was saying they had to do, they've done. Drivers are great. All these cards are going to have the FSR4 support. The question will be what does ray tracing look like? And I think that's just a general performance question. But the performance where it is, it's just going to shake out where it is. But these are going to be really good cards for sure, 1080p gaming, but possibly pushing into the 1440, with some, not everything at max settings, I think the core count, because it's really what it is. It's half of a 9070 XT
Yeah.
because it's
I'm
half the CUDA core, it's half the cores,
half the cores, but
half the memory bandwidth.
it's not necessarily going to be half the performance. It could potentially be much better than that because these cards have fairly high clocks.
Yeah, so that's the positive is that you're smaller with fewer cores, but the clocks on these are actually higher than the 9070 XT at 3.2. Now the question will be what overclocking options do you have? That's a really good question, and that just comes down to performance. And again, we've said this before. It really comes to the performance and the price point. I think if you price it right and you've got a decently good performing card, it's absolutely going to sell.
Yeah.
Now, switching over to Team Green, let's be honest. Let's look at what's going on. The 5090s are in a class of its own. They sell out instantly. They're selling for way above MSRP. And there is a substantial market for scalped cards that are selling for way more.
Yep.
Even if you spent $3,000 on an Asus Astral, they're selling for $5,000 to $7,000 on eBay consistently. So there's a huge demand for those cards, and they're just not able to make enough of them.
And that'll fit right in with your $10,000 gaming command center, right, gamers?
Right? Exactly. But what's interesting is you go down the 57, the 50 series stack.
Yeah,
that notion changes really quickly.
I mean, you cut the GPU in half for the 5080, and then roughly half again for the 5070 Ti.
But the demand is nowhere near the same from a gamer's perspective. Like 5080, they'll like when those stocks come in at 13, 14, 1500, which is what they're trying to get from. Those cards aren't instantly selling out. Those cards are sitting. Now, they do eventually sit out. They do eventually sit. But like a 5090, when that comes in, there is no way that card is not getting sold within minutes, unless you're at a micro center and no one's there to spend $3,700 on a video card. But it does not last the day for sure at a micro center. And as you go down to the 5070 Ti, it gets worse. Those cards sit. Now, the Ti, I think, is an interesting price point because those are selling for $1,000, even though they should be $749. Those cards tend to sell and be very strong. The 5070 Ti, I really think, is kind of the best value, and I think we see that because those cards do not last long. It is kind of the budget gamer, which is sad because it really should be the 5080 there, but it's not.
Yeah.
But those cards tend to sell very well, regardless of where they are. But where we really see a dramatic, demand curve drop off is the 70, the 5070 for sure. Dude, you go to a micro center, I can get you a 5070 all day long. Micro Center's now opened up that they'll sell 5070s online. They're not an in-store only piece. They're shippable. When you go on to some of these stock trackers, some of them have already started taking off the 5070 because it's just not hard to get them. And if that's your price point for a 5070 and 12 gigs you think is enough for you for your purchasing right now, it's not an issue. So it's something that we can easily get. And I think that just shows the demand. I really think that there's a number of these cards that there's a demand for on the 5000 series, but enough of these just lack demand. These cards are sitting. And I've been told, now I don't know, and obviously here I'm in the United States, but I'm told that Europe, the 5080 sits, and the 5070 Ti sits, and the 5070 sit. And the 5090 still sells in Europe. But it's my understanding that those cards, that the rest of the stack in Europe sits because they're pricing for whatever reason. I don't know who's making money, but someone is making a crap ton of money in the European market. And it's my understanding that like a 5080 sells in the European market for like almost $2,000 retail. And it's absolutely crazy. I don't know why it's any different. I don't know, but um, there's definitely a change in like consumers' views as because what's crazy is that these are all inflated prices that we're talking about.
Yeah.
But the other piece that's really interesting is you start seeing MSRP pricing on the 5070. We haven't seen it on the other ones. I think there's enough demand for the TI and the 80, but we've started seeing some MSRP pricing, and even then they're sitting. I really think the 70 is going to have a 5070 Super. Mark my words, it's going to have the exact same GPU die, but it's going to have 16 gigs.
Right.
And it's going to sell really well. It's just like the 4070 Ti Super. Because the 4070 Ti Super was a little bit bump on the core count, but the kicker was it had 16 gigs of RAM.
Yep.
And I think that the RAM size gamers look at and say, you know what, in today's world,
less than 16 gigs doesn't make sense.
I think a lot of gamers are looking at 16 gigs and saying, if it doesn't have 16, I'm just not even interested in it. And I think that we're seeing that on the demand on the Nvidia side. What's interesting is now shifting back is that, well, it's on both sides. The 5060 and the 9060 are slated to have an 8 gig and a 16 gig variant. What I don't get is why they think making an 8 gig card is going to be profitable or make the money.
There's probably some markets where they can still sell those cards because, exchange rates suck or, any number of things there. Because the 8 gig cards that I see selling usually go to the very low budget people, who just need something to drive a picture.
I almost think though, like from that perspective, like I think like if you sat there and said, look, a 60 series is going to have 16 gigs, end of story. If you want to go down the stack and you want to get a 50 and you said, okay, we're going to have an 8 and a 16, or we're just going to split in the middle and say the 50 is going to have it's not going to have a strong enough processor to ever use 16. Maybe it only has 12, right? Or you sit there and say, this thing is really like, 1080p only type of thing, and it only has 8, then maybe that makes some sense.
Yeah.
But what I don't get is that the 60 needs to just, I don't understand why they're doing it. I just don't see the use case of where any gamer at a price point where that double of RAM is going to make any difference.
Right.
Like, what 8 gig of RAM is going to be like, I don't know, 60, $75.
Yeah, right.
Like, are you really are the gamers not willing to pay $75 to double their RAM account, their RAM total?
If they're producing a card for it, they seem to think that there's a market for it. So, that's something we would have to see play out in the real world when they actually ship the cards.
Yeah.
And that's the question, is if they can ship the cards. Because we do have some additional news from Nvidia about new silicon coming out in Blackwell from their Arizona foundry that they're working with TSMC on.
Yeah.
So we might actually have Blackwell. Yeah. We might actually have some yield.
Now, the question will be, what version of Blackwell? Is it going to be AI or is it going to be consumer gaming?
Yeah. And well, Steve,
that we don't know yet. And that's
right.
What the capacity is there, and how quickly that'll spin up. I mean, if they're saying that, the problem is that, realistically speaking, the next generation is going to be mid to late 26. Okay, so we're probably talking late 26 is the next generation, the 6000 series.
Right.
So they must be thinking that they can get some reasonable amount of production, and they got to be thinking that there's a benefit from a tariff perspective because. But the other piece is that semiconductors have not been hit with tariffs, at least from what we're seeing. That
Hmm.
they have actually been semiconductors have been exempted regardless of what we're looking at.
Right.
So the tariff piece doesn't make a ton of sense because it must be a volume piece more than anything else.
Probably. See, my speculation, which correlates with the speculation we had in the past, is that the consumer GPUs basically got put on hold at TSMC so they could keep pumping out the AI GPUs.
Yeah.
And looking at the articles I've seen about the foundry, everything they're saying is AI this, AI that. Now, granted, the entire CES presentation was AI this, AI that, but the way it's presented kind of has me leaning toward these being the commercial side of the GPUs, the data center parts that are focused on AI processing, because they're talking about in most of the articles, gigawatt AI factories, and it's one of Jensen's quotes here, and I want to see if I can find it. Yeah, the engines of the world's AI infrastructure are being built in the United States for the first time. That tells me right there we're talking about, data center GPUs that are focusing on AI, which, as we speculated, were supplanting the yield for the consumer GPUs. Even though the basic fundamentals of much of the silicon is the same, um, you know, Nvidia's chasing the bag. And I can't frankly blame them because, they're in the game to make money, not necessarily to appease gamers. And if the big money is in AI data center applications, then, you know, for the sake of your shareholders and your job as CEO, you better put on that leather jacket and head toward the the consumer side.
I mean, the positive thing about that article, and if that's there's no question, I think that's correct. I think the
Yeah.
positive thing the gamers need to take out of it is that we're talking about more capacity
Yep.
from a silicon level. So even if, let's say, that does come on and it's purely data center, which is fine, that just means that hopefully in their Taiwan and Malaysia plants where they're cranking these out, that instead of getting 10% consumer grade or 10, 20%, whatever the percentage is, that hopefully the notion is that that percentage goes up.
Yeah.
But everybody who's saying anything, even within Nvidia, nobody from Nvidia is saying this is going to get better soon.
No.
I think that the notion of what gamers should expect is that it is going to be it's going to be very hard to buy a 5090.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be properly hard to properly get a 5070 Ti. I think if you want a 5080, I think as long as you're willing to spend what the going price is on a 5080, those tend to be fairly easy to easier to get. I shouldn't say easy, but they're
Yeah.
easier to get. And if you want a 5070 and are perfectly fine with 12 gigs of RAM, then that should be walk into your store or go to Amazon and just buy it because I
Yep.
think that's just that there's no demand there.
They're
I
just available.
Let me
Yeah.
rephrase that. I think I think if you go on and try to buy it at like 3 o'clock in the morning, you probably won't have it. But if
Yeah.
you're trying to buy a 5070, as long as you're looking at the stock alerts, when those stocks drop, they stick around for a while before
Yep.
they sell out. And I think that's just the notion of the demand on those cards. The other half, I would say, and I'll just be honest here, I really question if people should be buying the 5070 only because if there's not a lot of demand with them right now, once we get to a normal GPU market, those cards are going to lose their value super fast. And I think it's because the 12 gigabyte.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
No,
really
and
think that that's a card that you buy. The only reason I would say if you're buying that is that if it's at MSRP.
mhm.
Absolutely, without a doubt. Because if you sit there and say, well, when the GPU market gets better, I'll be able to sell this thing. No, I
No,
don't think
nobody's
so.
gonna
I
want
think you're
it.
going to discount it regardless. I think we're always starting to see that
Yeah,
because retailers are like, oh, yeah, these things aren't selling. They're not moving. I think
right.
Nvidia knows that. They've got the numbers to know that. And you've actually seen in some places where you can get below MSRP on a 5070. So,
Yep,
um,
which is unheard of for literally every other GPU, including the AMD GPUs, which, circling back to that topic, I'm actually kind of hopeful that this news about the 9060, which they're supposed to have pretty big stock on, is going to mean a lifting of pressure on the 9070s. Because, I mean,
no, it won't. It won't. You know why?
why?
Because there's so much demand on the AMD GPUs.
Hmm.
I really think that what's happened here is that um, gamers have just been fed up with this crap from Nvidia.
Hmm.
I read it. I saw an article as I was on my phone that came up, and I don't remember where it was, but the last great gaming GPU from Nvidia was the 1080, the 10,000
The
series.
1080 Ti. Yeah.
And I kid you not, like as I'm reading this article, I'm like, yep, 100% agree.
Hmm.
The 2000 series was not great. The 3000 series was just not good. The 4000 series, well, it had upticks and it saved it because, but you keep in mind, what was the notion that we have with the 3000 series? Low VRAM across the board,
Hmm.
and we're seeing that because those cards, a 3080 is absolutely gimped with a 10 gig,
Yep.
VRAM, and those
Yep.
cards are just getting killed because the processor is fast enough, but you can't with 10 gigs. You can almost not play 1440p on them
Yeah.
because you're running out of VRAM. 4000 series, I think, was better, but the problem that we had with 4000 series was availability and pricing.
Right.
And now we're having the same issue with 5000 series. So when we look at this and say, when was the last time we had a really good GPU? Like it was a 1080 Ti.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
I think gamers, I think in general, are looking at this and saying it's bullcrap. And I think the gamers are voting with their dollars when, let's be honest, the 5070 is below MSRP in some aspects and sitting. Now the other stacks are above, but let's be honest, you've got gamers waiting to get a 9070 XT that
Hmm.
should be 599, and they're spending well over $800 or $900 to get them, and they're selling out instantly.
Yep.
We're nearly doubling the price, and they're
Yep.
still buying them like no tomorrow.
And they're pre-buying them because this morning I was this close to dropping 850 on a power color, the Red Devil version, and it was 850, but it wasn't having an expected delivery date until May. I'm like, I'm not going to give you all that money and wait that long. Are you kidding me? Like, no, I mean it's ridiculous. And they're pre-selling their allocation, which I think is kind of scummy. But that's a different topic for a different day. Cuz in general, I think a lot of this is good news. I just don't think we're going to see the fruits of it for at least a year. I would actually be surprised at this point if we don't see stock actually kind of normalizing until next spring or summer.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm looking at like what's in stock at different micro centers. They're like, you've got these like the RTX A2000 series, cards, and they're just like the workstation stuff. But
Mhm.
the only thing I'm looking here, There's 8 5070s in stock in this one. Here's three more 5070s, but no TIs, no 80s, no 90s, nothing, and nothing, absolutely nothing from the 9000 series. Zero stock.
Hmm.
Let me look at one more. This is Micro Center. The one I was looking at was out in Kansas because I got a buddy out there. And yeah, they've got nothing. Like legitimately, they've got the Radeon Pro W7700, which is just a workstation. They've
Hmm.
got the A2000 workstation. In fact, they don't have anything that's consumer grade until you get down to the ARC B570.
A2000 is last generation, isn't it?
I know. Yeah. Yeah, it is.
That's the 4000 series GPUs.
Yeah, it is.
So,
So,
wow. Okay.
it's finding these. I mean, this is just saying that finding anything in stock is nearly impossible.
Yeah.
But what's amazing, like here's this store. This is in Georgia, 12 17 5070. So if you're in Georgia and you want a 5070 all day long,
Yep.
absolutely. But if you want anything other than that,
Good luck.
good luck. I mean, that's really what it's coming down to.
Yeah.
Is I think that there's so much, and I think with tariffs, it's got everyone absolutely scared. And so anything that comes to the shelf that's decently priced and has value is selling. But let's be honest, the 5070 is absolutely not selling.
No.
And I think it's because of the 12 gigs. If the 5070 was not gimped with the 12 gigs, if they just flapped it on and increased the price by $50 and it had 16 gigs, these would be selling like hotcakes.
Yeah.
I think that's, I mean, and
I don't know.
I don't disagree with that notion because
Yeah.
I think gamers are right.
Yeah.
Why should you spend that much for a 12 gigabyte card?
Yeah. I
Which
mean,
is
we've
why
already
I
established
question.
for years it's not enough.
Which
So,
is why I question why you would have an 8 gig card.
right.
Even at
Well, yeah.
1080p, I just think that you sit there and say, because the other piece I would sit there and say, like when I'm buying a card, I'm looking at how well this card is going to be in 2 or 3 years. I'm looking
Yeah.
longevity, and an 8 gig card is absolutely just going to get murdered in the resale value market because you think about this. I think 16 gigs, I think in the future are going to get viewed as negative
Hmm.
because I think we're going to use more RAM, which is going to mean that all these 16 gig cards are going to be really not good. So anyone who has a 24 gig, or a 32 gig moving forward are going to get viewed more positively,
Right.
which is where I think the AMD GPUs are probably going to have a leg up because and I think a lot of gamers are open to using AMD, whereas they haven't in the past.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of that comes down to, the AMD working really hard to overcome the bad drivers debacle that they suffered with for years. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
even as semi pessimistic as I feel I'm being in this show, I'm actually kind of hopeful that we do start seeing a turnaround. I don't think it's going to be soon, but I do expect it to come. But it takes a while for Nvidia to get to get TSMC's fab up and running and get some yield going. It's going to take a while for all of these things to kind of shake out in the wash. And once it does, I think the market's going to stabilize. Things are going to be in a much better position. But for right now, if you're building a new gaming PC or you're hankering for an upgrade, it, you're kind of stuck. And it's not a fun position to be in. Like I want to get a 9070, but I don't want to spend $850 for it. If I have to, I can, but that's $200 more than I really want to spend. And, am I getting that much more benefit? No. If I wait a year, can I save that $200? Probably, but we'll
See,
have to see how that all plays out.
look, I think from a buying perspective, everyone's got to figure out where their budget is.
Yeah.
But what I would say is this: if you've got a graphics card that you don't need to upgrade in the next 3 or 4 months,
Mhm.
then I think you can probably bank that the fall and winter of 25, I think we're going to probably see some better supply, and I think we're going to see better pricing
Yeah.
the last fourth of the year.
Save your
If
pennies for
you need
Christmas.
if you need a graphics card, okay, and you're building a machine, then I would say buy it now, because there's, unless you can wait until later, I do not think that the market's going to get better. I
Yeah.
think it's going to be really, really difficult. But I also believe that come summer, I think we'll probably see, as people go out and do more outdoors things, that maybe we'll see near the end of the summer some softening. The other half is that if the global economies respond with a lot of these tariffs, and we start seeing people not spending on unnecessary purchases, and I think some people will view a graphics card as unnecessary, that can absolutely have an effect on it. So if you need a card, I would be very serious about buying a card right now. If you don't need a card, I almost think it make sense to wait.
Yeah.
Nobody knows, but I really think that we're going to see some really interesting things about what's coming down the pipeline, and it'll be very interesting to see kind of how this all shakes out.
Yep.
So
yeah, exactly. Well, and on that bombshell, I want to thank you all for watching. We appreciate you giving us a little bit of your time. And I do want to note, we are aware of the audio lag issue on Turbo's end. It's something we weren't able to figure out before recording, and just said we'll roll with it. So do remember to like and subscribe and comment and all that fun algorithmic goodness down below in the doobly-doo. And until next time, have fun storming the castle.
Thanks, guys. Have a good night.
Good night, everybody.